Awesome. So I think we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for attending the Back to the Future, backing up all most of the objects in Jamf Pro. I'll be your host, Rose Dara. I have a quick note about questions and answers before we get started. This year, everyone here in Austin can participate in the Q&A by using the JNUC app to ensure that we answer questions for both folks here in person and the folks that are live streaming this. To do this, please open your JNUC app and select Session Q&A in the app. Locate this from the session list and start submitting and upvoting questions. Our virtual attendees will join in as well, asking questions directly from the session page. Your submitted questions will fuel the Q&A segment of this session. Thank you very much, and we've got Tom.
Thank you. All right, welcome to Back to the Future. If you realize, either in person or virtual, you're in the wrong session, too late, you're stuck. All right. My name is Tom Rice. I am the Solutions Engineering Manager for the customer-facing technical team at SHI. What does that mean? We provide custom solutions to our Apple-centric customers involving tools like Jamf and other Apple-integrated providers. Today, we're going to talk specifically, though, about backing up items in Jamf. But before we get there, I just want you to think about this really for a minute. If Marty McFly was to go back to the future today, he would be going back to the year 1993. And I hope that makes a lot of you feel old, because it made me feel very old. And I realized he wouldn't be so much influencing Chuck Berry as he would be influencing Nirvana and Pearl Jam and that kind of crew. So ponder that. If you take away nothing else from the session, take that away. Okay, so what are we going to talk about? Backups. Who needs them? Why do we want them? Why are they important? You know, who cares? A methodology and tools to automate your own backups, should you choose to perform them. Backing up an object from Jamf, that's why we're here. Jamf has many objects in them: policies, scripts, configuration profiles, extension attributes. Talk about how we need to back those up, why we're going to back them up, how we're going to restore them if necessary. Make sure we can restore that object. Make sure that object is in a state where, should something happen to our Jamf Pro instance or instances, we can get that object back in a relatively short period of time in a usable state. And then, finally, some caveats that we want to look out for, because backing up, as many of you know, isn't as simple as it sounds. All right. First, asking the obvious questions. Who runs backups regularly? You know, do we? We say we do. How many people say they run backups regularly? How many people actually run backups regularly? Two different questions, right? So we want to make sure that we're actually running these backups on a regular cadence and making sure they're successful. It's like, who likes to back up? I think the answer to this is obvious: no one. It's a tedious task. It's boring. Maybe you'll never need them. Maybe you got to worry about storage, where to put them, who's doing the backups, how current your backups are. No one likes to back up, but it's a necessary evil that we all have to do. How many times have you run out and said, you know what? I should buy a time machine drive for my computer. I'll do that later because I don't want to be bothered with it. And then later, your computer dies, and you're like, you know what? I really should have bought that hard drive. That would have been useful. All right, and finally, why do we back up? Seems obvious. You know, we back up because we need to, because things happen. There's a very wise man, Greek philosopher, I believe, who opened a diner in New York City. And he told a group of young frogs and bears and chickens and things that three very simple words that I think encapsulates why we need to back up. If it's working. No? All right, that's a problem. There we go. Peoples is peoples. Pete said that. Pete had very, very wise words for this young group of frogs and bears and chickens and things. What does that mean? No matter how much we plan for something, no matter how much we have things backed up or how we have things organized, people are going to do what they want to do. We have no control over that. Inevitably, you're going to hire some new intern or first-level tech on your team who's going to have a brilliant idea about how to help you maintain your Jamf environment that you worked so hard to create. And they're going to do something silly. And you're going to need to recover or undo what they did. So we always have to be prepared for the human element, and aside from the tech element as well. But the human element is what we want to watch out for. All right, so let's talk about some things we need to consider when backing up. First, the methodology. What are the tools we're going to use to back up? How are we going to back up? What tools are out there? How can we make this process available to our tech team, our tech support team, our other administrators in a simple and easy to repeatable fashion. Next, how often do we back up? Is it once a day, once a month, once a year? Is it every time somebody makes a change? The answer to that is that varies, right? It's up to you. How frequently do people go into your Jamf instance and change things around? How much stale stuff is in there that you may need a backup every day or every week? Where are we going to put these backups? Where do they live? Is it in the cloud? Is it on a hard drive? Do people have access to that hard drive? Do people have access to the cloud? If you back up a whole bunch of stuff, what good is it if your cloud admin leaves and takes all the passwords? Can that storage space hold the amount of backups that you're going to do? How long do we keep these backups? Do we keep them for a year? Do we keep them for a day, a month? Are you subject to any sort of regulatory compliance that says, wait a minute, if something happens, I need to go back X amount of time and prove that this was the state at that point in time, or provide data for any sort of legal hold or for any sort of troubleshooting? And how can we get these individual items back? A backup is no good if you can't get the items back out and in use. After all, that's why we're backing up, right? We want to back up in case something happens. We can get back to where we were before and be thankful that we had the backup and move on. Okay. With that, there are also some things we want to avoid. First and foremost, manual processes. We're all IT administrators. We work with IT or we work with engineers or tech support people or in the IT field. No one should be doing things manually. It's the reason why robot vacuums exist, right? No one likes to vacuum their house. You say you're going to do it, you're not going to do it. There's a whole industry made so you don't have to do things and think about them. It's the same thing with your backups. Don't think about them, just let them happen. They run, they happen, you don't worry about them. Because if left up to you or one of your employees, chances are they probably won't get done. Second, different tool sets. We don't want to use complicated things and different things to back up the same items, which are essentially the same items. You don't want to download your policies with maybe a script. You don't want to use Jamf Migrator to download all your extension attributes, because that means you have to train people on these tool sets. That means you have to have access to these tool sets. Keep it simple. One tool to rule them all. Following that, many different dependencies. We don't want to start installing crazy languages, crazy add-ons to these languages, libraries. Make sure that, again, if we change tooling, that people know that they have to change their dependencies. Also, those dependencies mean they need to be upgraded. So if you're using Python, say, and a new version of Python comes out, you switch from Python 2 to Python 3, there's a lot of breaking changes in there. It's a tooling that you have ready to support those support your workflows. So we want to keep it simple and keep it down and focused on one tool. The next thing we want to avoid is complicated workflows. Backups should be quick. They should be simple. They should be easy. Again, they're automated. We're not thinking about them. We don't have to go in and perform 5, 6, 7, or 8 steps. The more complicated they are, the less likely they'll get done. The less likely they get done, the less likely somebody will restore something if necessary. So we want to make sure things are not complicated, things are easy to use, and we can get them done quickly. Finally, platform-specific tooling. Whatever environment you're running in your particular shops, it's probably a mix of things. We're all Apple-centric here. We all have Mac devices, but I'm sure there's Linux, there's Windows. And sometimes some of this stuff, for lack of a better term, may be out of your pay grade. So you may be running a great ZSH script on Mac, and somebody will come in who is your new boss or another department that says, this is not where we're storing backups anymore, and we need everything to run on Linux. So take everything that you have and move it over to Linux or Windows. Some guy or woman gets hired and they love Active Directory, and they're like, we're going to use Entra for everything. We're going to just move everything over. Forget everything you do on Macs. I know it's the backups, but who cares? It runs centrally. So we want one process that can run everywhere. So with that in mind, we're going to do a simple methodology to perform these backups of our Jamf instance. We're going to use simple, repeatable bash functions. Bash isn't cool. It's not glamorous. It's not the new hotness, but it works. And it works on Linux. It works on Mac. And with a little bit of effort, it works on Windows as well. So you take those repeatable functions, and you run them everywhere you want. In fact, with a little bit of effort, you can even run them in the cloud, depending on what cloud platform you use. Accessible APIs. Notice that APIs are in multiple. We'll come back to that in a second. Anybody can get to these APIs. These APIs will help us pull these objects from Jamf, back them up. They're accessible by anybody who has access to your Jamf Pro instance, and they're easy to use. Cross-platform tooling, we just talked about that. So we're going to take this tooling, and if, again, somebody comes in and says, we're scrapping all our domain controllers, get them out of here, everything's going on EC2 servers in Amazon. Take the bash script, put it right on EC2, don't even think about it. It runs the same. So we don't have to worry about it. Move it from point A to point B, no fuss, no muss. Again, and automated, right? We don't want to vacuum our homes. We take our Shark robot, we schedule it, it gets out of its little dock every Sunday, cleans the living room, cleans the den. We don't think about it. It happens again next Sunday. The floors are clean. Everybody's happy. No, until maybe you have kids and they leave toys all over the place and the robot identifies it's a hot mess and it's not going to do that. But we'll talk about that later. All right. First, we have choices to make. We talked about APIs, plural. Many of you know Jamf has 2 APIs. They have what's known as their classic API, which is the first one listed there. And then they have their Pro API. And you notice it's version with an asterisk next to it. Pro API is constantly evolving. It's constantly changing. Some of the endpoints have multiple versions, version 1, version 2. And in fact, if you go to Jamf's API landing page, which is your domain, with your Jamf instance /API, you're going to see descriptions about these 2 APIs. And the Pro API says, may impact or break functionality. Yeah, you did read that right. So as much as Jamf is developing this Pro API, it is still not consistent. And it is still, perhaps, will introduce some breaking changes depending on how the endpoints evolve. So we're gonna, for the purposes of this demonstration, for the purposes of this tooling, we're going to stick with the classic API with the exception of one thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. The other thing we need to talk about, XML versus JSON. Data is stored within Jamf, or retrievable from Jamf, in 2 formats. There's XML on the left, there's XML on the right. What you're looking at here is a representation of a single smart group for computers that have Zoom. XML on the left, JSON on the right, the exact same data. So what do we use? Which one do we use? Now, the XML, all the tooling for that is already built into Mac OS. So that's a simple choice. We don't have to download anything extra if we want to use that. We could just put this script on the Mac, all the tooling's there, good to go. If we want to use this on Linux or Windows, there's a library we can download to have that tooling in there as well. So that keeps it simple. And many workflows already exist within the classic API and use XML. However, the Pro API, once that gets fully fleshed out and moved, is all JSON. So we don't want to exclude JSON either. So the simple answer is, why not have both? Let's do both. We can download an XML and JSON, we'll download an XML and JSON. For JSON, we're going to use a simple tool called JQ. It's a JSON parser. It's widely available. It's on GitHub. It actually just started being maintained again as new developers picked it up, new maintainers picked it up. So it's current, it's active, and it works on all the operating systems that we need it to. You want it for Linux, you want it for Mac OS, Windows, it's there, it's available, it's simple. It's one dependency that we have to maintain instead of many different dependencies. Okay, I know all of this seems heavy, but relax. Rest assured the Earth's gravitational pull is fine. So let's get into the heart of this. Let's get scripting. There's a GitHub repo that has a script in it, Jamf Pro Object Backup. There'll be a link to this at the end of the presentation, too, if you don't want to copy it now. We're going to download the script. We're going to give it an option. We're going to give it an object type. And that's it. Simple as that. The script will do the rest. So what are some of our options? We have the option to download in XML format, or we have the option to download in JSON format. You can choose both. You can choose XML or JSON. And that will download, again, in whatever format you choose. We can download all the objects in Jamf Pro if we want. Most of the objects in Jamf Pro. And then we can also choose to download certain extra attributes that are associated with these objects. For instance, 2 of the big ones, scripts and extension attributes. If you were to download a script from Jamf Pro, the actual script, you would get the name of the script, the notes that it has, the display information, all the parameters. All right, that's useful. We can upload that later. The script also in its base 64 encoding. But maybe you just want the script to pull out and give later. Maybe you want that script so you can run it locally. You can give it to someone else on your team. You can put it up in GitHub or in your own VCS and you modify it later. So the script also has the option to pull out just the contents of the script objects it downloads from Jamf, which is the script itself, and store those someplace else. And we'll see what that looks like in a minute. And the same thing with extension attributes, because most extension attributes at the heart of it are scripts. Now we also have pop-ups and text boxes and dates, but most people typically use scripts as extension attributes. So we have the option to download just that script part of the extension attribute too, if you want to recreate that someplace else later. Because sometimes you don't just have one Jamf instance, right? You may have a dev instance. You may have one that you're using as a release candidate. Your company bought another company who bought another company. Now you have 4 different Jamf instances that you're trying to maintain. So when you're trying to sync all these things, it becomes a little bit problematic. So we'll download them all in one place. The script has the ability to parse one or multiple Jamf instances and download those objects into individual folders based upon their contents. So let's say you have a whole fleet of Jamf instances, and we'll look at some output in a little bit. The script will create a folder based on the date, and then it will create a subfolder based upon the name of your Jamf instance. And it's typically the first part of your URL. So if everybody's on Jamf Cloud instance, it'll be companyname.jamfcloud.com. So the folder will be named company name 1, company name 2. Within that folder, it will create subfolders based upon the objects that you're downloading. Policies, scripts, configuration profiles, Jamf accounts. Within those folders, it will then create two final subfolders based upon the object type. So if you download all your policies in XML and JSON format, you'll have 2 folders in there, one for XML, one for JSON. As it downloads these objects, so let's say we're going to take policies. So we're going to pass the option to download in XML format, which is -X. We'll look at the individual options in a second. We're going to pass the object type, policies. It's going to save all these policies to a folder. And that's nice. But Jamf does do a couple little things in that download process that make these objects a little, if I may use a technical term, wonky. So we want to clean up those objects after the fact. So what the script is also going to do is going to pretty print the XML or JSON, so it's human readable. Just like we saw in this previous example, that's what pretty printed. If you haven't seen it, that's what pretty printed XML and JSON looks like. So it's going to download it exactly like that, just so you can go in and look at it later and say, okay, I know exactly what I'm looking at, and this is how I can, what's going on. This is how I can use this or give this to somebody else, and they can see exactly what's going on as well. Every object in Jamf also has an ID associated with it. You've probably seen this, especially if you use the API. You're going to download an object by the Jamf ID. That ID is typically meaningless. But sometimes when you upload an object to Jamf with an ID of an object that already exists, you might get conflicts. In most cases, Jamf will simply say, wait a minute, this ID is already in use. Don't worry about it. Let me use the next available number. But again, if we're talking multiple instances, if we're talking dev instances, corporation instances, why worry about ID conflicts if we don't have to? So the script is going to strip all of the IDs from your objects that you download. Jamf has a brilliant feature that when you re-upload an object and it's missing the ID tags, it will simply append them with the next available ID number. So if we don't have to worry about them, why? So we're going to strip them, take them off, forget about it. Some objects also download with extraneous information that we don't want because we can't use it. Your accounts. How many people have tons of their texts in Jamf, or they have different groups based upon their help desk or their system admins, and everybody gets an account, a local JSS account. Some people have auditor accounts because people in legal need to go and look at stuff, or you have level 1 desks that only enroll computers, so they only have an enrollment-only account. Those Jamf objects have passwords associated with them. Jamf, when you create the password, hashes that password, which means you can't download it, because otherwise what good is it? But when you download the account objects from Jamf, it's going to include that password field, which shows up as a series of asterisks. That is no good. When you attempt to recreate that account because somebody with a higher level of access didn't like the level 1 tech that accidentally erased the computer the other day, so they went in and deleted their Jamf account, and you don't know what the privileges are, you upload that object with the password attribute still in it, Jamf is going to tell you to take a hike. It doesn't know what to do with this hash password. It's meaningless to it. It can't upload that file. So we can get rid of those passwords and create new ones once we upload the account. So the script will go in, remove any password attributes in Jamf account. So ultimately what I'm saying is it's going to clean up all the objects that you download from Jamf and make them ready to be re-uploaded in case it is necessary to do so. One other thing it's going to do, just to make life a little bit easier for you, as it downloads the object, it's going to create a file, as we talked about, per object. So you're going to have all your policies in one folder. All of those policies are files. They're XML files or they're JSON files. It's going to name those files with the name of the object in Jamf. So if you have a policy that says install Google Chrome and you download the XML version of that policy, it's going to create an XML file called install Google Chrome. Well, this is great. However, Jamf does allow you to name objects the same thing, which makes things a little bit confusing. You know what doesn't like objects named the same thing? Most operating systems that are storing them in the same folder. That makes life a little bit difficult. So what we're going to do is we're going to append the Jamf ID of that object to the file name. So in case we could end up with install Google Chrome -9, -10, -11. And this is simply a fail-safe to say if someone went in and created 20 different install Google Chrome policies because we just acquired 5 different companies and they all have different requirements, now we can differentiate them too. Like let's say maybe you work for a large ad agency and they have many different holding companies and they all want their own version of Chrome. Okay, so what does this look like in actuality? Animations. We all love them. All right. So we have a Jamf instance. In that Jamf instance, we have a bunch of objects. We want to get those objects out of that Jamf instance. Simple. How are we going to do this? We have a script we just talked about. That script lives somewhere on a Mac, in AWS, on a PC. Doesn't matter. It's going to run. It is going to make an API call to the Jamf instance to retrieve all those objects that are in there. It's going to use this by using the object get, an API get call to the object endpoint based upon the available objects. So we can get scripts, we can get extension attributes, we can get configuration profiles. All of those API endpoints are named very specifically. Don't worry about what the actual names are. In the script's help documentation, it'll tell you how to make that specific call. Because if you look at the API endpoint, you'll see they're named in a very specific format. So you're going to take the name of the API endpoint, or the script is going to take the name of the API endpoint based upon the object you specify, make a call to Jamf, and retrieve the related object. It's then going to take those objects and bring them to where the tooling lives. Now, you can do whatever the heck you want with them. You want to copy them to a hard drive? You want to put them up to the cloud? You want to send them to somebody else? Go ahead and do that. We'll send them over there. Forget about it. Don't worry about it until we need them again. It's going to put a folder with the date on it, so you know exactly when they were downloaded, and again, as I said, with the name of the instance on it, so you know exactly when, what instance they came from. The beauty of this is, script doesn't care if it's one instance or many instances. If you have a dozen, the script will just run on a dozen and repeat the process X many times. So we have all these scripts, all these instances with all these objects in them. The script will just run again, pull them all down, copy them, and then put them right back up into whatever storage they need to be. It's simple. It's automated. You set it to run on a certain date. You did nothing. Life goes on. The building burns down later. You have a backup off-site that you can restore all these objects to. All right. So by default, the script will do a couple things. It's going to set a backup location. If you don't define one in the script, it will set one for you. That backup location by default is going to be the same folder from which the script is run from. It is going to generate an authentication token. As we learned in Jamf 10.35, basic auth is being deprecated, and Jamf has now moved to authentication tokens. Also, starting in 10.48, we know that Jamf is now introducing API roles. So you can have specific roles to make API calls outside of a username and password. As of this writing, the script does not account for that. But when the script makes API calls, it's going to generate an authentication token. It's going to validate that the token still exists. Authentication tokens, remember, have a lifetime of 30 minutes. So every time it makes an API call, it's going to validate that the token is valid for that particular server it's making an API call to. If JQ is not installed, remember we use JQ to parse the JSON data that we download, to format that JSON data. It's going to check to see if JQ is installed. If not, it's going to download the version appropriate for the architecture that you're running it on. If you're running it on a Mac, it'll install it on a Mac. If you're running it on Linux, it'll call the Linux package manager and download the version for Linux. No fuss, no muss. That backup all objects to JSON, not true. That was originally an old slide. That That doesn't exist anymore. So we'll just ignore that for now. It will delete all backups older than 30 days. We got to have some kind of cleanup here, right? We talked about before how long do we keep backups. So by default, it will go in the backup location that you have specified. It will find out if there are any folders there that are older than 30 days, and we'll go ahead and delete them. All right. Talk about some script options. We talked about we can output to XML. We can output to JSON. We can output all objects to XML. So whatever objects are available to download in the script, maybe you don't want to think about it. Just -A, X, everything gets downloaded as XML. Maybe you don't want them as JSON. So download all the objects as JSON. The beauty of this is they can also be combined. So if we did a -A, JX, you'll get all objects in JSON and XML format without even thinking about it. All right. So and then some object types that we can download. We talked about policies, scripts, computer groups, advanced computer searches. Pay attention to how those are listed. We'll talk about that in a second. We talked about API endpoints. And there's a few others too. And if you look at the script, it'll go through them. We're not going to cover all of them here. But if you go through there, there's about a dozen or so objects you can download and store and not worry about. So what does that look like once you download? You get a folder, and that instance name and date should actually be reversed. You get a date of the download. You get the name of the instance. You get the object type. You got the format that it's in. And then we talked about the file name appended with the ID of the object in Jamf. You notice there's another folder highlighted there. Content's not encoded for scripts. That's the content of the script itself. That is a human-readable content of the script. So if you want to take that, make it executable, save it someplace else, and you put that script to run it from your local machine, put it in GitHub, store it someplace else, that's what that folder is. It's all the actual scripts from your script objects in Jamf. And extension attributes will also have that same folder. All right, logs. Everybody loves logs. A wise man once said, more data is more gooder. So we got logs. Logs can output the standard out, or they can also output to a file based upon your preference. So logs are helpful, right? We have the date, the time, the script, the execution, the name of the script, and what it's doing at various points. So again, why is this useful? API tokens are a good one, right? We talked about API tokens. Sometimes maybe you have different credentials for different instances, or maybe an instance is not responding. The script will also, by the way, check if an instance is responding or not responding before it does anything. If it's not responding, it'll note that in the logs and simply move on to the next one. So you're like, wait a minute, I've been backing up stuff for months. Why is nothing in there? I check the logs. You see the instance is not responding, only to find out that somebody in finance canceled your demo instance because they thought they were paying for it. So good thing to check. All right. Now we have these backups. What does the restore process look like? We have all these great files, and you're saying, Tom, great. The heck do I do with these? How do I get them back up? Because we just hired an intern. He thought he knew better, saw something about DEP Notify. Jamf just talked this morning about how their new onboarding experience is going to have all this notification built in. He said, what do we need DEP Notify for? We're going to delete this thing. It's just taking up space. All right. So we're going to go to our storage. We're going to get the DEP Notify policy out of there, or the DEP Notify script. We're going to bring it down to our tooling. We're going to take that tool, and we're going to reach out to a Jamf instance, or multiple Jamf instances, depending how many are in our fleet. We're going to use the API. We're going to get scripts. We're going to use the API curl command get. We're going to look at the scripts endpoint. We're going to retrieve the list of scripts in that Jamf instance. And we're going to see, did that particular Jamf instance have the DEP notify script removed? We're going to take that list of scripts. We're going to bring it over to our tooling. We're going to compare it to the name of the script we want to upload, and we're going to find out that it does, in fact, not exist. This is one of the instances that intern Johnny hit and decided was not a viable instance for DEP Notify. So we're going to reach out back to the Jamf. We're going to take the object. We're going to reach back out to the Jamf instance using another API method called post, and it's going to post that object back to Jamf. And it's going to take that script object, and it's going to put it back in there. You notice that animation, unfortunately, was too quick. Every post call you make to Jamf will be made to an object endpoint followed by ID. And Jamf, if you're not familiar with the Jamf API, if you call it to /0, so in that case, it was post, your instance name, -scripts, -ID, -0. -0 in Jamf will use the next available slot for that object. So you don't have to think about it. Just make a call a post call to ID 0. It'll take that script and put it in the next available slot. So that's great. Now, we just repeat the process. And maybe in that same repo where this script lives, there's a whole bunch of other scripts that actually do this for you. So that script will reach out to all the other instances, see what scripts they have there, and see which ones don't have the DEP notify object in them. And we'll see some do, some don't. That script will then say, OK, well, there's 4 instances now with the DEP notify script in them. I don't care about those. Let's go ahead and upload it to the ones that don't have it, because we have backups, and we'll only upload it to where they need to go. So a quick and easy restore. It takes about 5 minutes to do all this, depending upon the size of your fleet. You're back up and running. People are turning on their Macs. They're getting notified of new objects being installed. Everybody's happy. The woman who was just onboarded in finance out in Kansas City isn't calling the help desk because she has no idea what's happening on her machine. Because DEP Notify is back. It's ready to go because she had backups and a simple restore methodology. A few caveats with this things moving forward. Not all objects have API endpoints. What don't? For instance, account settings. And I'm not talking about privileges and stuff like that. I'm talking about, say, your time, when you set your time zone or your search parameters. That can't be downloaded. Packages. We heard about JCDS 2.0. Well, as we heard this morning, that's not available yet. So packages themselves, the actual package that's attached to a package object, can't be downloaded. You can download the metadata about that package, but you can't actually download the package itself. Self-service bookmarks also don't have API endpoints. So as you go through this, you may find some things that just can't be downloaded via the API. Not all objects back up all their things. Technical, I know, but we talked about that before. Accounts, passwords, they're not there. Certain other objects won't back up all their things. Certain objects will back up all their things. For instance, when you download a smart group, it will download all the computers that are associated with that smart group. Bye, Mike. So we have to be careful what you download. There's a few other cleanup steps that the script does do. Smart groups are meant to be dynamic, right? So why do we don't want all the computers associated with smart groups. That's not useful. So when we upload a smart group, we only want the state of the Jamf instance or the state of computers that match that smart group. So when you download via the script, when you download a smart group from Jamf, it will also strip out all the computers associated with that smart group. Don't worry, static groups will keep all their computers. So we want to be careful about that. The last one is probably the most important on this page. API calls, until you switch over to API roles, require usernames and passwords. Where are you going to put them? I would recommend not putting them in the script. If anything is not in the script, by default, it is going to prompt you for it. So it'll prompt you for a username. It'll prompt you for a password. It'll prompt you for an instance or list of instances to back up. It will prompt you for a location to store your backups. The 2 most important prompts we want to talk about there are probably the username and password. You can also store all of that data in the script itself, so you don't get prompted. So when you run this in an automated fashion, you're not getting these prompts all the time, because otherwise that breaks automation. However, it is a very bad idea to store any sort of secret information in a publicly accessible place or a place that may be accessed by even a small set of users. So I encourage you to use some tooling, and you can incorporate this into the script, that stores those secrets elsewhere that the script will simply read and utilize when necessary. All right. So that is backing up all or most of the objects in Jamf Pro. So at this point in time, I would like to turn it over to any questions that might exist, either real or virtually.
We've got a couple of questions here. The first one is, how would handle a massive import to Jamf, such as migrating to a new hardware?
Right. So they're in that Jamf instance, that Git repo that I talked about before, there are API scripts that will upload everything to Jamf Pro. So what those scripts will do is they'll take a list of instances, they'll take a list of objects. So let's say you have 100 instances and 100 scripts. Those scripts will take, they'll parse through each instance name, they'll parse through all the script files, and send them out right to those instances. So that's a different set of tooling, but it's in the same repo. So just as we automated the backup of these objects via the API. We're going to use the API to push all those objects out to 1 or 100 Jamf instances, depending how, and 1 or 100 objects.
Our second question here is 2 parts. 1, will it also back up computer records? 2, will it hash out FV, I think is file vault, recovery keys, startup recovery keys, activation lock bypass codes, MDM logs that might have a remote lock code?
A lot of things to hash out there. Currently, no, it does not back up individual computer records, nor does it back up any of those secrets. Some of those are exposed via the API. File vault keys just recently became exposed via the API. I didn't include those at this point in time for a couple reasons. One, computer records are a lot. Some of those are dynamic. People don't necessarily need them based upon their state and time. It is an easy addition. The file vault keys are an interesting one. Any sort of key is an interesting one, right? Because that goes back to that secrets question. So not only now are you storing secrets in the script, but you've downloaded all those file vault keys, and they're now in a storage location that may or may not be secure. So that is something I kind of kept out and wanted to tread lightly on for now. The script itself is only 2 functions. It is a function to download JSON. Well, the download functions are only 2. It's a function to download JSON, and it's a function to download XML. All it does is take the object name, feeds it to the individual function, and spits it out. So that's something that could be easily added. I did not feel comfortable adding it because that is something that, again, you have to make sure that the security you have in place can handle those secret keys. You don't want all your, if your file vault keys are on a central location on some storage in your company's Teams channel, well then, what good is having file vault encrypted machines?
All right, we've got another question that came in. Is there any option for differential backups, or does this use full snapshots?
Right, so it's not technically snapshots, and there are no options for differential backup. So this is whatever you set the frequency to, it will download the object in whole at that point in time. So it's not necessarily taking a snapshot of your instance all at once. It is, again, downloading all the individual objects to files. It's a little bit different than the snapshot. There is no option for differential backups. One of the things I was considering, did not really have time to get it done for this presentation, but it's definitely something that can be looked at.
And we have another here asking, does Jamf Pro Cloud already offer a backup option, rollbacks to Jamf Pro server, etc.? Why develop this solution instead of use Jamf's?
Interesting. So the answer is no, not that I've seen. So if you have a Jamf instance in Jamf Cloud that you somehow gets mangled, for lack of a better term, your option is to contact Jamf and have them roll back the database or dump a snapshot on it, back on it. I'm not familiar with their actual backup methodology. I know they restore methodology, more to the point. They do back up the databases. I don't know if that database is a database restore. They're restoring a snapshot. So what does that mean? You're restoring everything that's in Jamf. It's an all or nothing scenario. So if you want something restored because that DEP notify script got deleted and you don't know how to go back, your only option is to call Jamf and say, hey, restore my instance to this point in time. Well, that's great because it gets you that DEP notify script back. But what about all the other stuff that happened between point A and point B? All that stuff that's happened, maybe you got new file vault keys escrowed. Maybe you got new policies that were uploaded. Maybe somebody made a change to a script to make a breaking change, to undo a breaking change that was made before. All that stuff is undone when Jamf restores one of your backups from an earlier point in time. So the point of doing this is you can selectively restore only the objects that you need to when you want to without worrying about anything else in your Jamf instance.
Asks, Jamf does not provide environment replication. Can this be used in automating a prod to test replication so recent changes in prod can be tested in backup environments?
100% yes. So there are tools out there that does that. Jamf doesn't do it in an automated fashion. There's tools such as Jamf Migrator that will do it. It has a more GUI interface on it. But this will provide the same functionality. So this, in combination with the other scripts in that repo, will let you take scripts from instance A and put them in instance B. And that's why we talked about removing things such as computers from smart groups, IDs from the policies, and other information. So you can have a clean, working object and put it any place else you want.
And our next question asks, I realize this will vary from organization to organization and Jamf instance to instance. Can you give a rough idea of how large these backups might be?
Kilobytes in size. So we're talking every object that you download, they're basically XML and JSON. At the end of the day, they're just text files, right? So the bigger the script, the bigger the file, but we're talking bytes and kilobytes. So you can get away with downloading your entire instance dozens, hundreds of times and not filling up much space at all. Again, it's all dependent upon how many policies you have in there, how many objects you have in there. Maybe you have a script that's 100 lines, another one's 1,000 lines, but they're relatively tiny.
And our next question asks, how do you handle differences between the JSON and XML representations of the data? Are you converting the object, or are you using it to accept content header to specify what to download?
Yeah, so the Jamf API actually allows you to specify via header if you're downloading via XML or JSON. So the object itself is downloaded in two different. It's not converted once you download it. It's two separate objects being downloaded. It's one making an API call requesting XML. The other is an API call requesting JSON. So it is multiple API calls, which is kind of double the work, but we're not worrying about any data transformation or making sure that the data is in the right format. So it's just a header sent via the API that says, give me JSON, give me XML, or give me def.
Awesome. That is all the questions that we have for now. In the event our attendees have questions both in the audience or at home, where can they find you later, Matt?
All right. You can find me on Mac Admins at trice. You can go to my GitHub page, and I'll mix that later. There's a QR code here. If you want to scan that, I will be at the conference all week down in the SHI booth or wandering around. If you need more advice from Pete, he's there too. But again, the Mac Admin Slack is probably the best place to find me at trice. Yeah, that's it. And just
we have a couple minutes, and I just had another question come in.
all right.
How are groups restored to objects, or are the objects restored without groups?
So that's a good question. When you restore objects, there are precedents that you have to restore, and there's dependencies upon those objects. So if you have, let's say, a policy that is scoped to a smart group, and both of those got deleted, if you restore the policy first without the smart group, policy doesn't care. It doesn't know it's supposed to have a smart group, or if it can't, more to the point, it can't find the smart group. It's like, well, you told me I was supposed to have the smart group. It's not there. I tried. I moved on. So it's important to restore sequentially. So again, with the policy example, you're going to want to have anything that's attached to the policy restored first before you restore the policy itself. So restore your smart groups first. Restore your scripts if they're there. Restore your extension attributes, and then restore the policy. There's no logic that says, wait a minute, this is missing. You should have this. It's going to carry on its merry way. So it's important to know the kind of the state of your instance, or if you don't know the state, how you want that state to look, and then restore those dependencies first, and then the parent object on top of that.
Awesome. That wraps up all of our questions. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you.